The Pacific Ocean, January 31st, 2000. Somewhere above the cold blue water off the California coast, a Boeing MD-83 is flying upside down. Not in a movie, not in a simulation, in real life, with 88 people on board and 2 pilots who refuse to give up. This is the story of Alaska Airlines Flight 261, a story about mechanical failure, extraordinary courage, and 11 minutes that changed aviation forever. It began, like most disasters, as an ordinary day. Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, a sun-soaked resort city. Families loading luggage, couples holding hands at the gate, children pressing their faces against terminal windows, watching planes taxi across the tarmac. Flight 261 was headed to San Francisco, then continuing to Seattle. A routine West Coast run, the kind Alaska Airlines flew hundreds of times a year without incident. Captain Ted Thompson was at the controls, 53 years old, a decorated veteran pilot with over 17,000 flight hours. Calm, experienced, the kind of man who had seen almost everything the sky could throw at him. First Officer Bill Tansky sat beside him, equally experienced, equally calm. 2 professionals who had spent their careers preparing for emergencies they quietly hoped would never come. At 12:42 p.m., Flight 261 lifted off from Puerto Vallarta. The sky was clear. The ocean below sparkled in the January sun. There was nothing, absolutely nothing to suggest what was coming. For the first 2 hours, the flight was perfect. Then quietly, silently, somewhere beneath the cockpit floor, something began to fail. The jack screw. Most people have never heard that word. But on a commercial aircraft, it is everything. The jack screw is the mechanical component that controls the horizontal stabilizer, the tail fin that keeps a plane flying level. It operates through a small Acme nut, a threaded collar that must be precisely lubricated and regularly inspected to function correctly. Alaska Airlines had stretched its maintenance intervals on that jack screw. Internal pressure to cut costs, to save time, to keep planes in the air and schedules on track. Nobody flagged it. Nobody stopped it. And on January 31st, 2000, the Acme nut on Flight 261's jack screw had worn down so severely, so catastrophically, that it was hanging on by a single thread, literally. At 4:09 p.m., Captain Thompson noticed something wrong with the trim. The plane wasn't holding its pitch correctly. Small corrections weren't responding the way they should. He didn't panic. He began methodically working through the problem, the way thousands of hours of training teaches you to do. He contacted air traffic control, declared a mechanical emergency, requested a diversion to Los Angeles International Airport. On the cockpit voice recorder, his voice is steady, almost conversational. Controllers cleared the airspace. Emergency vehicles were placed on standby at LAX. Everything was being handled. Everything was under control. And then, at 4:20 p.m., the jack screw gave out completely. The horizontal stabilizer snapped to its full nose-down position and locked there. Flight 261 pitched violently forward. The nose dropped. The plane began to accelerate downward at a terrifying rate. Passengers were thrown against their seatbelts. Overhead bins burst open. Screams filled the cabin. At 17,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, Alaska Airlines Flight 261 was no longer a controlled aircraft. It was falling. What happened next is documented word for word in the cockpit voice recorder transcript, and it is one of the most extraordinary recordings in aviation history. It did not have to happen. Ted Thompson and Bill Tansky were not awarded medals. There were no ceremonies, no Hollywood films bearing their names. But in every FAA training manual that was rewritten after Flight 261, their 11 minutes are there. In every jack screw inspection that happens on every commercial aircraft flying over your head today, their 11 minutes are there. In the tightened maintenance regulations, the stricter lubrication schedules, The auditing requirements that came directly from this crash. Their 11 minutes are there. They did not save Flight 261, but what they did in those final moments, the calm, the skill, the refusal to surrender, that has quietly saved thousands of lives since. Somewhere in a federal archive, the cockpit voice recorder from Flight 261 still exists. The voices of two men doing the impossible, preserved forever on magnetic tape. Calm voices, focused voices, two professionals who knew exactly what was happening and chose, until the very last second, to fight anyway. The Pacific is quiet now where they fell. The water doesn't remember, but aviation does, and so should we.